Welcome to the Daily Agenda. I suppose it should surprise no one, the tyrannical antics of far left prevent. Yes, they are far left, there's absolutely no question about it. Common purpose, formerly Marxism today, they've all been on these so-called leadership courses, in other words brainwashing courses. That's the first point. There are a litany of other examples that makes them far left. And quite frankly, anyone not to the left of Lenin is far right in their warped ideology, quite frankly. And apparently it's new classification. Perhaps it is for the uninitiated, but it's certainly not new for me. And so the purpose of this video tonight is to explain to former British National Party members, and also those who are still in that party, if it still exists, that is, after what Griffin did to it, and Adam Walker, then obviously they need to be aware of the fact that Prevent regard us as a top target for being former members of a completely legal political party registered with the Electoral Commission, and at one time the British National Party got over 1 million votes. Okay? This is not a democracy. We all know this by now. This is an elective dictatorship. The regime is totally at war with freedom of expression, particularly anything that smacks of right-wing expression. And even on the left, as I said, if they're not to the left of Lenin, quite frankly, i.e. in the Trotskyist camp, because Keir Starmer was a Trotskyist, and once a Trotskyist, always a Trotskyist, and most of these people he's hired are also Trotskyists, Pabloists, call them whatever you will. A third of the globalists were formerly Trotskyists. Formerly. No, nonsense, you know. If you look at it in the context of what I'm about to tell you now, with my former membership of the BNP, in which I was told your past will always haunt you, there's no such thing as being a former member of the British National Party. You will always be a member of the British National Party, even if it's 20 odd years after your membership expired and you left. In my case, in a dispute with the leadership. So, let me go back to March 2020 at Her Majesty's Prison, Ranby. I'd been shipped there from HMP Nottingham, a few months before, doing a sentence for expressing, well, my right to freedom of speech, really, quite frankly, hurty words routine, you know. We're all familiar with that one, aren't we? So, I was visited by a counter-terrorism officer on House Block 5 on the 30th of April 2020, and her opening words were, "Don't worry, you're not in trouble, there's nothing to be concerned about." And then she announced she was from counter-terrorism. I said, "So why are you here to see me?" And she said, "Well, you were once a member of the British National Party, so what? So what?" I reiterate the fact that membership of the British National Party has never been a criminal offence. And even if they made it a criminal offence now, that it's just a wool chasing from, quite frankly, the law cannot be applied retrospectively. But in actual fact, we live in a warped tyranny, an elective dictatorship, supported only by a very small minority. So don't be surprised if they do try to get the consent of Parliament to apply the law retrospectively. But in essence, they don't really need to, because they're actually using this classification to settle scores. So, you know, going back to the early 1990s, the real beef with me is the fact that I was a leader of a direct action unit and they could never nail me for anything. And I was very successful at stopping the far left's terror groups by force with my colleagues, in actual fact. And so that's what unfinished business as far as they're concerned. They want some revenge, as the American calls it. I'm going to have me some revenge. That's their own mentality at warped crackpot Prevent. And so she also went on to say, this skinny, almost nothingness of a girl, quite frankly, who'd been trained at that prison on House Block 1, an absolute swamp of criminality and cruelty. In fact, let me give you a clue as to what happens on House Block 1. There's a vape racket amongst many of the other rackets going on there, and people get tortured in their cells just for not paying back vape debts on double bubble, you know. And she was an officer, on that wing. It's the worst wing in the prison. Well, it was then, and had been for a number of years. So that was her background. She came from that background. And she was trained by a socialist miner who was actually working on House Block 5. He took great pleasure in boasting about it, in actual fact. I won't name him because the thing is, they get this awful problem, this bad rash of fear, alarm and distress. And nobody needs to prove fear, alarm and distress. They just have to assert it. And asserting it to them is evidence. They don't need any sporting evidence of any description. They just need to throw a curtain up in the corner of the court, call it special measures, and let the pantomime unfold before a jury. And in most cases, not even before a jury in actual fact. You know, if it's before a bent magistrate, it's a kangaroo court, and you're convicted even before you walk through the door. You have a chance of acquittal in a Crown Court. We'll get to that later. And so, yes, she further cemented the intimidation tactics with some fantasy about a pagan death curse. Because remember, these people hate paganism with a passion, and in particular they hate Odinism. They have a vehement hatred of Odinism because it's the true European faith, and these people are utterly committed to wiping out the true European faith, every single aspect of European culture, and criminalising all white people as terrorists. So, of course, I'm classed as the pinnacle of that threat to their nihilistic Marxist monstrosity, quite frankly. And so, in the current classification, they say that anyone who believes in the Aryan soul, well, in actual fact, it's not so much a case that Odinists believe in the Aryan soul. Odinists use a term called folkish Odinism, which means we're not universalists, in other words, communists. We're not woke fanatics, quite frankly, and they don't want that. They're quite all right with the Asa True UK and the Asa True community in the States and a number of these other crap-hot left-wing organisations. No problem at all. But they have a big problem with anyone who's right-wing, particularly folkish Odinists. And of course I fit that category, don't I? So they had to invent this fairy tale, this little horror story. In their fairy tale, you see, there always has to be a baddie and a goodie, and apparently these nutters, and I can't really call them anything else, because they are nutters, quite frankly, nutcases, as in mentally unstable, clinically deluded, crackpots, and a menace to every member of the public. That's what Prevent are, being no doubt about it. And so in this warped little fairy tale, there has to be a baddie and a nasty story. And so the baddie was me, allegedly, and the nasty story was, well, I allegedly had put a death curse on the unborn child of my former partner, Elizabeth Brown, and caused her to lose the baby, no less. Oh yes, they went one step further at the High Court. They expanded on the fantasy, even after it had been blown out of the water. That's how demented, how dangerously demented these people are. Don't ever doubt me. You know, we're dealing with sociopathic mad people. Absolutely no doubt about it. And so, yes, well, Elizabeth, you see, a major problem biologically, because Odinists don't believe in the Immaculate Conception, do we? That's Abrahamic fantasy. And so Elizabeth had a hysterectomy several years before I met her, and therefore biologically impossible for her to conceive a child, and obviously she wasn't carrying a child, and she wasn't carrying my child at all, and therefore putting a death curse on imaginary baby, causing imaginary baby to experience an imaginary death, is entirely in keeping with these nutcases that Prevent. So you'd have thought that would have been the end of it. No, not at all. I had to tell them that if they intended to harass me again, because she said I might have to come back and see you again. And I said, don't come back and see me again unless you intend to charge me and put me to an outside adjudication, and I will wipe the floor with you over membership of the British National Party. As for the death curse, my goodness, get a grip on reality. It would have been laughed out of any court. At least some sanity still prevails in these courts, and I know exactly how to wipe the floor with these crackerjacks. And so, obviously, they shuffled that one off to the sidelines until we got to the High Court, and then they expanded on the fantasy by saying the imaginary baby had an imaginary death. Listen, Lincoln's Inn barrister, no less, working for the government legal department. Nutcases. nutcases, quite frankly. Evidence doesn't matter. These people live in a warped little dream world. That's what the liberal left is all about. And you talk about liberals, that's actually a code for communism. Liberal today means communism, quite frankly. Look at the Liberal Democrats, particularly in the southeast. They're infested with former Marxist Labour Party activists who had a spat within the Labour Party and found a safe haven in the Liberal Democrats because they're just attuned to one another, quite frankly. And so, going back to the fantasy and fiction of Area Command and their prevent counter-terrorism fanatics, prevent terrorism fanatics, because that's what they really are. They use terror tactics, they use harassment, intimidation, bullying, and all of it is just completely illegal. So this is the reason why they've had to expand the scope of their, I could have put it, their nasty Stasi-like operation, because they weren't getting anywhere. And so now they just want the absolute right to just make up whatever they want and say, oh look, this person's a terrorist. So a cultural nationalist now is a terrorist. An ethno-nationalist is a terrorist, and an ethno-nationalist by definition should be both cultural nationalist and ethno-nationalist. And then of course there's a third category of white supremacists. So a white supremacist by definition surely has to be a white supremacist, an ethno-nationalist and a cultural nationalist all rolled into one little package. Absolutely. So the centre-right, so-called, who are in actual fact the centre-left ideologically, who've spent years dividing the right, all part of a deliberate policy, and calling us racist and the wheel far white, like little babies in the playground, because that's all they are, let's face it. So now they've got another massive shock coming their way, haven't they? Because it doesn't matter this stupid little game they play of calling us racist and the real far right, because they're classed in exactly the same manner. It's absolutely irrelevant. It should be a cause of unity, but no, absolutely not. The centre-right will continue with its exceptionalism and its delusion, because they must be accepted from prosecution in their view. Lucy Connolly is a prime example, from prosecution for anything that they say or do. They don't want the freedom of speech, they want the freedom to abuse and threaten. That's my experience of dealing with them. In fact, I made a video last night about little Tommy Robinson, and I fully expected a litany of abuse. So today I've had to delete over 20 abusive comments, because I will not allow people to post abusive comments on my YouTube channel. This is not free speech absolutism. I don't advocate free speech absolutism. No one is going to post absolute mind-rotting garbage and vile abuse and false allegations on this channel. End of. Get used to the idea. It's not going to happen. Okay? And if you claim that censorship, whatever. I don't care. I'm not really in the least bit interested. Learn how to debate in a polite and respectful manner, and your comments will be shown on this channel, and not until. And so, going back to this wonderful fairy tale, HMP Ramby. So yes, the battle went on, and of course they'd announced quite openly that I was a former British National Party member, and that followed me all the way to HMP Sudbury, open prison in Derbyshire. And so there, Area Command showed their true face wonderfully when I was on West 7 Wing. I was called in by an SO, and which is a senior officer, a feeble little man, quite frankly, a man of no account, honestly, truly. How he ever became a prison officer is just utterly beyond me, but there you go. They take just about anybody, don't they, in this left-wing nutcase paradise. Certainly do in my experience, definitely. And so, he was their frightened little lackey, and whenever they barked orders at him on the telephone, the little man went running over to me and, you need to come and speak to Area Command. No, they're going to have to come and speak to you. Well, good, let them come, because they'll get zero cooperation. So I was fully intent on a direct confrontation in the courts over this harassment over being a member of the British National Party. But they bottled it. They completely flunked it, in actual fact, and backed down, walked away, and had to release me. But before they did that, a few days before, I was in the office with the SO in the offender management unit, and he was on the phone to Area Command, prevent nutcases, and he said, Oh, he's not on a wing full of fucking white men only, is he? That's right, he's not on a wing full of fucking white men only, is he? Could you imagine what would have happened had they said, he's not on a wing full of fucking only, is he? Or Asian men, or Jewish men, do you understand what I'm saying? Or any other mascot group? Oh no, absolutely not. No, they wouldn't use such terminology, because in their warped mindset, they've already decided all white people are terrorists unless they are to the left of Lenin, like them. And that is the fact. And so the warning that I'm giving former members of the British National Party is this. Don't think that just because you left the British National Party a number of years ago, by whatever means you actually left the party, that it's over. It most definitely is not over. In fact, I know a guy in Great Yarmouth who was visited by Prevent a couple of years ago just for campaigning against the boats coming across the English Channel. Apparently that's regarded as an act of terrorism. But according to the Lotus Eaters and other centre-right commentators, talking heads on YouTube, they've only just discovered this matter. Hardly surprising, they're always behind the loop, aren't they? Always comes to them late, quite frankly. But yes, this guy in Great Yarmouth, he had a battle with them and he did exactly what I did. He told them to sling the hook and to bring it on in the legal context, and they didn't. They left him alone. For now, that is. But I've no doubt they'll be back, and I have absolutely no doubt they'll be back to harass me. And they'll get exactly the same response again. There will be direct confrontation in the cause. No cooperation, direct confrontation in the cause. A battle to fight it out. End of. They're getting nothing else from me, ever. But, like I said, at HMP Sudbury, yes, that's where they screamed, he's not on a wing full of fucking white men only. You know, anti-white racism. It's the norm with these people. And most of them are white. Remember, they're just brainwashed white people. Deracinated trash, quite frankly. That's what they are. They're people who've been taught to loathe their own culture, hate their own people, and despise their own race. And anyone who's prepared to stand up for their culture and for their people and for their race and their nation, i.e. the vast majority of people in this country, white people that is, yeah, we're all terrorists. So the battle lines are drawn. But don't think for 1 minute this minuscule garbage unit can actually do anything against the vast majority. No, the way they operate is this. They pick on certain individuals because they are terrorists, you know, bullies. You know, there are men and women of absolutely no account. They're weaklings in actual fact. They usually are, to use that hackneyed phrase, kids who were bullied at school wanting some revenge on society, and they feel empowered by Marxism, you know, and this warped mentality of Prevent. It's their way of getting their revenge back on society that failed them so badly for being born weaklings, isn't it? So anyway, what they will do is they will pick on certain individuals and they will try to pick off the leadership of all three factions on the right. According to them, look, we don't regard cultural nationalists as being right wing. They are definitely the centre left. The reason why the centre left, the far left, regard them as being centre right or far right is because they're not to the left of Lenin like they are. We've covered that matter before. I don't regard the so-called centre right as being on the right at all. I regard them fairly, firmly and squarely on the centre left. Occasionally they float over to the centre right when it suits them, but mostly they're, how could I put it, ideologically fluid. That's an adaptation of gender fluid. They're ideologically fluid. They float between ideologies when it suits them because they don't really know what they think at all. They're lost, confused people. But they needn't be confused about this, because we're all subject to this, whether we like it or not. And so they will most definitely unleash a campaign of targeting all the leading people on what they consider to be the far right. Yes, that's right, the far right. And they will pick people off one by one. And so therefore what needs to happen is nationalists in particular. I'm not talking about the so-called leeches and loonies on the centre right, so-called nationalists. I'm talking about nationalists, ethno-nationalists, not civ-nats, not cultural nationalists, yeah? We need to form a legal action group. All former members of the British National Party need to form this legal action group, and we need to donate a sum of money, each of us, to this action group so that we can actually fight these battles when our people are arrested and harassed and they try to fit them up in the courts. Because believe me, no one else can be trusted. I absolutely assure you. You know, my experience of dealing with 99% of lawyers in this country is they're all working for the state, quite frankly. Absolutely guarantee you. All working for the state. And the most notorious example was the Birmingham barrister at Nottingham Crown Court on the 4th of July 2017, when he said to the judge, another lefty, you know, who just couldn't wait to get home and play his golf with the other dirty little Freemasons, isn't it? And yes, he said, well, you know, I'm the naughty boy here, Your Honour, what, oh? Yes, you know, they're repulsive, these people. I absolutely despise them, quite frankly. Despise them. They're so corrupt and so damned haughty. And that's why grandiose narcissism is so rampant in the criminal courts, in the so-called legal profession. But anyway, yes, I'm the naughty boy. What, oh, Your Honour, ha, ha, ha. Please forgive me. Of course you forgive them because they're all on the same side. Have you seen my client's political career, said he. Ostensibly, the case against me had absolutely nothing to do with my political career in the British National Party. Of course he had, yes, and he admitted it. And he had a bundle of paperwork in front of him, which looked like about half a dozen pages. Probably produced by those absolutely twisted lunatics at Special Branch, and they're all nutcases and crooks as well, quite frankly. Political police, you know? And so that's another example that even before the trumped-up case against me got to the extent that it actually put me in HMP Ramsby, they were focusing on my membership of the British National Party, even though I left the British National Party in April 2002. And so that, as I'm sure you can count, is over 23 years ago. And the point that I'm making is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. To them, it's 22 seconds ago. If you left the BNP 30 years ago, it doesn't matter. If you left the BNP 10 years ago, it doesn't matter. Particularly if you left the BNP in 2011, when it pretty much collapsed, the electoral base, in actual fact. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when you joined or when you left the BNP. The fact of the matter is, if you were a member of the British National Party, then you are a target for Prevent. So you can be absolutely certain, because they never succeeded in banning us, which is what they wanted to do. These left-wing, nasty, evil crackpots failed completely to ban us. They also failed to get an executive order from the Home Office banning us. They couldn't get Parliament to pass legislation banning us. So this is their revenge, you see. This is the way they go after it. These people were all involved in these far-left extremist groups, you know, in the early 1990s and later. And because of their failure, now having infiltrated these government departments, they want revenge. And this is their revenge. And we are going to have to get together, quite frankly, in an organisation like the Legal Action Group and stop these people. There's no alternative. And of course, you can just sit back and ignore it if you want to, bury your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't happen. No problem at all. There'll be nobody coming to help you. I promise you, nobody coming to help you. When I had to fight Prevent, it was alone. No one has to fight these crooks alone. They are terrorists, quite frankly. They are the real terrorists. What they are doing is a social terrorism. And many people say it in actual fact. Even Amnesty International want them disbanded, and they're on the left. So come on. Let's stand together. Let's work together. But if you don't want to do that, no problem at all. You know, stand alone. And don't be surprised when you get fitted up in some secret court and there's nobody there to help you and no solicitor is prepared to do anything on your behalf. Because any solicitor that isn't as left-wing as them, or to the left of Lenin, won't dare go against the system because it's their bread and butter, particularly if they're on legal aid, and the vast majority of them are. So we're going to have to do it ourselves, okay? And this will be just for members of the British National Party. Former members of the British National Party are invited to join the Legal Action Group to prepare for the direct legal confrontation that is coming with the far left Prevent fanatics. If you want to ignore the warning, no problem at all. It will be on your head. But I'm not ignoring it under any circumstances, because I've been through it. And I know how these people abuse the power and authority and the tyranny at their disposal. Absolutely. You know, if you want to experience that tyranny without a fight, then that's what will happen. But I say, join the legal action group, and together we can take them on and win.